Hi, I'm Joe Lewis. Welcome to this segment on tactical head rhythm. Basically, when I use the word rhythm here, like we did on our last segment, when I talk about foot rhythm, we're talking about learning correct movement. We get hit the head too often. Why? Because the head is too stationary. So we're going to be working on different ways of moving the head. So, for example, if I'm facing an opponent, I kind of tilt my head slightly forward towards my opponent, kind of move the head a little bit. What I'm doing with my head is I'm encroaching on my opponent's position, so we would call that head encroachment. If I lean the whole body forward and put the whole body inside my opponent's defensive perimeter, inside his space, we would call that maybe some type of body encroachment. We're going to show you a list of maybe 14 or 15 different ways you can keep the head moving. Too often what happens in the martial arts is we're taught to keep our bodies upright. We're talking always about that spinal alignment, remaining upright and straight. And we teach our opponents as well as ourselves to lock the head, keep it stationary, and try to move the hands sort of in this fashion to block an incoming punch or an incoming strike or what have you. Rather than leaving the hands stationary to shield the body and use the hands for some type of counter maneuver and learning to move the head like side to side or down, up, back, forward, what have you, instead of moving our hands, which should be used as weapons instead. Our head is not designed to be hit, so we must do everything in our power to make sure our head doesn't get hit. Remember the 6 lines of defense we talked about in a previous tape. So, for example, number 1, when your opponent attacks you, use that old concept distancing. Learn to move the position, moving that position, maintaining the correct range, avoiding getting hit. Number 2, if the position doesn't move, learn to move the head and the body. See, moving the head and the body, a second line of defense. Third line of defense, and it should be like a last resort, learning how to block that incoming kick or that incoming punch. Number 4, as a good deterrent, fire some type of counter as you execute the block. And number 5, as your opponent squeezes the trigger to fire that kick or to fire that punch, fire a counter maneuver at the same time. So in effect, what you're doing is you're intercepting his incoming strike. And then, of course, the old tenet of fighting, the best defense is what? Always a strong offense. Fire first, head him off at the pass. So in a second, we're going to be getting into different ways you can tactically work on what we call head rhythm. All right, let's go down a list of different ways you can work on what we call head rhythm. Now again, you could be out there in a sparring match and your coach knows your head's too stationary. You spend too much time trying to move your hands to block everything. Your head's too stationary. You get popped with these kicks and punches. So he keeps yelling out there, rhythm, rhythm. He's not saying head rhythm. He's not saying head movement. But as soon as you hear that word rhythm, you know the coach wants you to get your head moving. What can you do to move your head that makes tactical sense? Remember before we worked on some containment techniques, how to keep your opponent contained so it's easy for you to set up an attack. Now hopefully today I'm going to show you different ways of moving your head, not only for defensive purposes and for containment purposes, but also to make it easier for you to approach your opponent, make that engagement or make that entry before you engage with your combination or whatever technique you're going to use to attack your opponent. Working with me today will be Carl Savage. Carl, come on out here, face me. Say hello to our audience. All right, square off against me. Now let's just start off with a couple easy ways that you can work on practicing keeping your head moving. You can do this in a shadow fighting context. You could do it as you're hitting the back, gradually do it in some limitation sparring drills, and then gradually start integrating it into your sparring drills. Number 1, probably the easiest thing in the world to do is notice the space between Carl and I. If Carl doesn't make a move, stick your hand out straight, Carl. Notice I'm out of striking range. Okay, pull your hand back. Now this is what we call head encroachment. I'm encroaching his face, his defensive perimeter. If I just kind of tilt my shoulder slightly forward, folding from the waistline, what I'm doing now is I'm flexing my back. See, folding from the waistline, I sort of put my head a little bit in his space and I just kind of wiggle it around a little bit. You've probably seen fighters do this. As I change up a little bit, change up, you see a guy just kind of a little head encroachment, kind of a little tease and move with the head, a little slight pump this way. Call that head encroachment. Number two, if I place my entire body in. So in other words, if I do more flexion with the back, folding from the waistline, put my whole head in here, now I'm way inside Carl's defensive perimeter. We call this body encroachment. One type of body encroachment is what we call a zigzag. Used to see some old boxers like Archie Moore, Gene Former, Carmen Basilio do this. For example, I'll lean off to the side and then I zigzag. Watch my rear end. You've seen this on the entrapment tape where I pull the head back and forth, or the containment tape. See what I'm doing with the head? Come back over, do a little change up. Now this time I kind of go down to my right side. Notice I'm inside his defensive perimeter, but I keep the head moving, kind of keeping him off balance. He's not sure what I'm doing. But in effect, what I'm doing is setting up, trying to make it easier for me to make my entry to set up an attack. You all know the old-fashioned fake. Now, head rhythm. So I'm not really moving the fake. I'm folding from the waistline slightly forward, putting my shoulder inside his defensive perimeter and back up. I can do a single pump, boom, boom, or a double pump. That would be an example of a shoulder fake. Again, using head movement to break his balance or to break his rhythm. Another one, the old-fashioned duck. Ducking, what I'm doing is I want the head to come straight down. So if I'm fighting a taller opponent, I want to make my target less. So I'm changing the angle. I'm changing the height of the target. I'm flexing the knees, straight back up. I can duck down, change up, go over to a body encroachment, change back up. Sort of learning to mix my movements together. Let's get into another set of a series of ways you can create this movement with the head, what we call head rhythm. This is called slipping. Let me show you 3 different ways you can work slipping. Number 1 is called a crouching slip. When you do a crouching slip, you're going to fold from the waistline, flexing the back, pushing the hips backward. That means flexing hips and folding the knee, which means you're flexing the knee. So you're down in a crouching posture. If Carl were to stick the left hand straight out in my head and I slip to his outside, see I'm setting up a shoot for the legs or a right hook for the heart. Right? This is a crouching slip to his outside, back reposition, or I could do a crouching slip to his inside. Let's say he throws a straight right hand at the head and I slip to his outside again, setting up a left hook to the liver or a single leg grab underneath, or I could come in, grab the groin, do a takedown in a self-defense context. Now, crouching slip means I'm flexing both knees. Next, upright slip. Upright slip means one knee remains straight. When one knee remains straight and I flex the other knee, for example, if Carl stepped in with straight left hand to the head, all right? Now, if I slip this way, keep the rear knee straight, the front knee is flexed, because one knee is straight, it keeps my hips in an upright position. Since I'm in an upright position, as he pulls his hand back and I ride the punch back in, it sets me up to make an easy counter strike in an upright position. Since I'm in an upright position, I'm not going to be countering the waistline as I did when I was in a crouching posture. So we have the crouching slip and the upright slip. Now, step out slip. Step out slip position. Let's say Carl steps in with the left hand at the head and I step out slightly, then I slip. This is called step out slip, setting up punches to this side, single leg takedown, or straight knee to any vulnerable part of his body. Back reposition, step out, slip to the opposite side. He steps in with a straight right hand, I step out, and then I slip down. Notice it sets me up for the left hand or some type of a takedown. So let me show you that from the front. As the opponent would be coming towards me, I step out first. Step out, then I slip. Opposite direction. Opponent's coming straight towards me. Watch how the feet move. I step out first. He's taking the head out of alignment. All right, you see where the head rhythm comes into play. Now I change not only the width of my stance, but I also change the height as I crouch down. Step out, slip, creating angles for my opponent. So we've got 3 ways of slipping. Face me again, Carl. Now what we call snap back. Way of kind of tilting head back out of range, avoiding an incoming maybe hook kick, a round kick to the head, or some type of straight punch. Let's just take a straight right hand. Let's say Carl is going to step in and execute a straight right hand to the chin. As he does that, I just simply snap back, overextending my back. If I can take the hips forward, my shoulders forward, I'm flexing my back. If I take my shoulders back, I'm extending my back. This puts me in what we call a snapback position. As Carl recoils the hand, I ride the hand back in with a counter strike, elbow or punch, or whatever your favorite technique may be. That's called snapback. All right. Next, I can do what we call rolling. Remember from previous tapes, rolling, I'm going to take right hip or left hip, and I'm going to turn the hip towards my center line, which is this part of the body. So in other words, I'm bringing my hip, the iliocrest part of the hip bone, towards my navel. See it? And when I do that, that's called rolling. Wherever the hip goes, the shoulder follows. Notice as I roll to my inside, the shoulder ends up in front of my chin. So if Carl was stepping in with a straight right hand to the chin, if I remain stationary, I get popped. But if I turn the front hip towards the center line, the shoulder comes up, and I use the shoulder as a guard, as a defensive tool to avoid his incoming strike, be it a punch or a kick. A couple more ways of moving the head, working on your head rhythm. A simple step back. You use this a lot in martial arts when the guy's throwing a kick or a punch at you. So let's say, for example, Carl steps in with a straight punch. All I got to do is step back. I can make him miss. Usually you work the step back in conjunction with a snap back. So here's the snap back. He steps in the punch. I step back and snap back at the same time. As he pulls the hand back, I ride it back in with a counter punch or the counter kick. Or I do the step back conjunction with a rolling motion. So as he steps in the punch, I step back and I work the roll at the same time. As he pulls the hand back, I come back with the counter shot as I ride it back in. Next, what you're all familiar with is called weaving. Sometimes people mispronounce it and they call it rolling. This correct term is weaving. Watch it. Let's say he steps in with the left hand towards the head. I slip to the outside. As I slip, I circle underneath. This is called weaving. I weave underneath, come back up with my counter strikes, whatever they may be. If the right hand is coming in, I slip to the outside, circle underneath. Again, this is called the weaving. As I weave in, I come back up with the counter strikes, setting up the counter to his incoming punch or kick. Next, rock and buck, or buck and rock. Watch it. Sometimes if I want to set up a kick, I'll fake the punch and then follow through the kick, or vice versa. I'll fake the punch and then come instead with the kick itself. Put three of those motions together. Shoulder fake, hip fake, shoulder fake, then follow through the punch. You get sort of a bucking, rocking type motion. You rarely see that, but it works really well both in kickboxing, straight boxing, and especially well in point fighting. Next, let's try this, okay? We're going to call this rock and roll. Here comes a straight left hand to the chin. I slip to the outside to make a miss. Then I roll back around as I come back around with my counter. Or, let's say you step into a straight right hand. I slip to the outside making a miss. Roll right back around with my counter. Sort of a rock and roll type motion. Next, this kind of funny looking movement. A little embarrassed to do it, but it's sort of a combination of a shaking motion, quivering type motion. I use it sometimes in what I call my scramble step. So it's a scrambling, shaking,